a die. So this particular impression die is quite large, but the main thing about it is that it is quite deep. That's what's going to make this a more challenging design to press. So I'm going to start with, I think this is 18 gauge copper. It may end up being too thin, but I'm going to give it a shot and we'll work slowly and see how this goes. So you want to start with a piece of metal that is quite a bit larger than the design itself, because you're going to have to pull this metal down into the depth of this die, and it's probably 3/4 of an inch to an inch deep. So it's going to be a challenge. The main thing that I want to do with this die is I want to make sure that I get the metal pushed down into the deepest part of the die before I focus on getting any of the other detail. So I'm going to place my metal, it's been annealed, I'm going to place it over the design, and then I'm going to choose a piece of urethane that fits within the design itself. I don't want to use a large piece that is going to trap the metal against the top surface of the die. I want to use a smaller piece that is going to stay within the design itself so that the metal doesn't get trapped on the surface. It can just be formed straight into the die. We're going to go slowly. We're going to press it, check. We're going to anneal a lot during this process. You want to move the metal a little bit, anneal it, and then continue. I'm using the tool steel pusher. This is our 2-inch round tool steel pusher. And I want to center the area of the design where I'm applying pressure. So for right now, this die, the design is pretty centered on the puck, but let's say your die had multiple designs on it. If the area you were pressing was over off to one side, you would want to make sure that that part is centered under the press. So anywhere where you're applying pressure directly, that needs to be centered under the tool steel pusher and centered left to right and front to back in the press. We're gonna press it. I'm using an electric, so it's gonna be a little loud. Okay, I'm not pressing it all the way. I'm not going full force because what we want to do is we want to just get that metal starting to form down into the die. So that's quite a bit of depth just with a single pressing. So we're going to anneal this and we're going to press it again. Okay, I've annealed my metal and I'm going to place the metal back into the impression die. I'm going to use one of my fingers just to kind of wiggle the metal back and forth to make sure that it is fully registered within the design. And then, because we're getting so much depth, I'm going to take smaller pieces of urethane and I'm going to pile them up in the center. These are, maybe 2/3 the size of the original piece. And this, because I want to get down to the nose of that bear, I want that to get, reach the bottom before anything else. I'm using smaller pieces of urethane to focus that pressure right in the center. So again, we're making sure everything is centered in the press under the tool steel pusher. We're going to press again. And we're going to take a look. Those out, and even just before we even take the metal out, you can see we're getting a lot more detail. I use kind of a dull old kitchen knife to pop the metal out of the die, and we could take a look. Not too bad for a second pressing. I'm going to anneal it again. and we will repeat the process. You can see along, especially along this top edge and this side on the left, you can see how the metal that was straight edges now pulls inward. That shows you how much the metal around the design is being pulled toward the center of that die. That's one reason why I'm not going to trim any excess material yet. Until I get to the deepest part of the design, I'm going to leave this extra material because I want to make sure that there's still going to be enough metal around the design to fully pull into the deepest part of the die. Okay, I've put my metal back in. I've made sure that it's registered in place. I know that the deepest part of the design is the nose. It's a little hard to see, but it's right in the center here. So I'm going to put another small piece of urethane right in that deepest portion, and then I'm going to stack the other pieces of urethane on top, and that's just going to force more of that. It's creating more mass, or more volume rather, for the urethane, so it will have more chance of forming directly down into that deepest part of the die. So everything's aligned. I'm gonna make sure everything's centered, the usual, and we're gonna press it again. Take this out. Oops, see, I went too far too fast. You can see the nose, you can see the steel die through the nose of the bear. Dang it. Okay, we'll pop it out and we'll take a look at it. We're getting really good detail, but you can see, even pressing and annealing and going as slow as I did, I still, on that last final press that I did, I pushed it too far, and that metal just fatigued and split because I was forcing the metal to stretch more than it could. So I think what I will do, this will be just a lesson in what can go wrong. I'll try again, probably with 16 gauge. I think 16 gauge, increasing the thickness of the metal is going to increase my chances for success, and then I'm gonna go even slower. So this is a really good example of something that does happen, and it happens to beginners and seasoned metalsmiths alike. It's a good learning experience, so when you split a die, completely fine. That's why we always suggest that you start with copper. That way when you screw something like this up, it is not the end of the world because you're not using higher quality and more expensive materials. So it still looks pretty good. The detail is really not too bad, but that nose split, and there's pretty much nothing I can do to salvage this piece at this point. So keep that in mind. It's always something that can happen. Don't get too upset and start over. Figure out what you think went wrong. It's usually you've either formed your metal too quickly, you've not annealed enough, or your metal isn't thick enough for the depth of the die that you're using. So, or you're using too big a piece of urethane. So I hope that helps show you what can happen, what not to do. And I'm gonna try this in 16 gauge and see what we come up with.